was not a good positioning after the spectacular papers of Focke and Luca with all those pictures for a poor historian to present after archaeologists and architecture historians. So not so many pictures, I'm afraid. Too much talk, I'm afraid. And the topic is huge, so apologize for probably occasionally it may seem superficial, but last night I had a pressure to include more on churches, the policies vis-a-vis churches, so the few pictures that you would see are related exactly to that topic. Am I not responding to the wishes of the audience? So, it would be strange to talk about Orthodox Christianity within the Sultans trail. Doesn't imply much of Christianity there, but the Sultans trail took and is taking place through lands which were majority Christian. For the sake of limiting my time, because the topic I can easily hold a series of lectures on. I have cut off Catholicism, I have cut off other branches of Christianity, so orthodoxy. And then it is also within one big issue that it doesn't torture historians, but it makes us think, what is actually Ottoman? What is the Ottoman Empire about? Who is Ottoman is another question. Is it only the elite, as we have been taught, or are the ordinary subjects, those who are not part of the elite, also Ottoman? They are Ottoman subjects. I have discussed with someone that we will commemorate shortly is the Orthodox Christian architecture Ottoman as well. Is Christian art only Christian, or is it Ottoman and Christian? How much there is interaction between Christianity, how much Christianity was something separate from the Ottoman Empire as a big structure, as something imperial. So with all these questions, I claim that Orthodox Christianity in the Balkans was an important component of the Ottoman Empire, of the Ottoman culture even, and that those who are interested in the Ottoman Empire in the Sultans trail as well, better pay attention also to that component. So, what happened to Orthodox Christianity after the Ottoman conquest? If we are to talk about the Orthodox Christianity after the conquest, just a few words for what it was before, what the Ottomans found in the Balkans. From an organizational point of view, several churches as autonomous autocephalous institutions existed. Of course, the most important one was the Oecumenic Patriarchate seated in Constantinople, but there were also other churches. This is the peculiarity of Orthodoxy. It allowed independent churches to independent states. So as soon as the Bulgarian state decided to adopt Christianity, very soon the local rulers wanted their own church because they realized quite early that the church is a powerful instrument of influence, political, and also of repulsing other influences coming from outside. So Bulgarians had their patriarchate from the 10th century with some interruptions due to political changes in the Balkans, losing independence to the Byzantine Empire, but sort of autonomy, church autonomy from the late 9th century. The Serbian church also, as soon as there was a Serbian principality, there was an attempt, Saint Sava, let's talk, and onward until the 14th century under Stefan Dusan, when with Bulgarian help, the Serbian church emerged as an autocephalous. Before that, it was on the way to, but not independent. Again, due to political changes, we have the Ohrid Archbishopric, which appeared at the very beginning of the 11th century. The Ohrid Archbishopric, which the Ottomans would eventually call Patriarchate, emerged immediately after the destruction of, I won't call it, Samuel's kingdom. I won't call it what it was, because it's a point of dispute between my country and another country. I don't want to take sides in this. But after the destruction of Samuel's kingdom, there was a new archbishopric, which was called in the first years Bulgarian. Then it became Ohrid, and it would become a regional church through the Middle Ages with changing scope. Something that is important about these churches is that they very often followed the boundaries of the respective state. So Serbian kingdom expands, everything is within the Serbian church. Shrinks, loses territory. Or previously, Bulgarian kingdom expands, territories come into the Bulgarian church. The moment it begins to shrink, it loses territories. In the 14th century, the Bulgarian Patriarchate was just a very tiny piece of land, but was still Patriarchate. So this is the, let's say, the organizational base. What happened after the conquest? Well, after the conquest, let's say the Bulgarian church disappeared. Shortly about that, the Serbian church, after the conquest, lingered, was in a legal twilight. We don't know. Officially, it disappeared, but apparently, at least colleagues tell me that it hadn't. Underground, sort of. The Ohrid Archbishopric expanded immensely, and so did the Oecumenic Patriarchate. More importantly is what the policy of the Ottomans was vis-a-vis those states, those churches, and the Christianity in general. One of the main changes is that Christianity, from a religion that was sponsored by the official state, became of secondary importance and no longer received this generous support that it used to before. And of course it was subjected to the treatment of the so-called Dhimma Pact, which is not actually a fixed parameters framework. The more I work on it, the more I regard it as kind of guidance for how to treat Orthodox Christians and Jews, but less so as a fixed structure. Very often the changes occurred subject to changes, evolution of Islamic legal thought and practice, to the variations of Ottoman policies in time and space, and also to some local specifics. In some places it was more, let's say, I forgot to, but let's go here, which is my next topic. It was subject also to regional evolution of relations between Christians and Muslims, to the spread of Islam, and so on and so forth. So in the following, I will discuss many issues regarding the organized Christianity and the subject of the status of individuals, Christians in general. A few words of all those structures that I mentioned previously from before the Ottomans. The Bulgarian Patriarchate disappeared forever, well, not forever, until 19th century, when its reconstitution became the subject of fierce controversy, mainly because between Bulgarians and Greeks, much less between Bulgarians and the Ottomans. The Ottomans were just in the loge watching their subjects fight and enjoying that, because that was, power is in division, divide et impera, they say. So the other churches, however, came back. The Ohrid Archbishopric never disappeared until the end of 18th century. The Serbian Patriarchate was restored, but towards the end of 18th century, both Ohrid and the Serbian Church disappeared for other reasons. Looks like less so pressure from the Ottomans, more pressure from the Ecumenic Patriarchate, with accusations that they were dealing badly with their financial status, not paying their taxes, and so on, and with an increasing pressure to appoint Greek leaders of those churches. Ultimately, they lost their independence. Something important that we should mention as special factors in the development of Orthodox Christianity is the role of churches, of monasteries, and specifically Mount Athos. Mount Athos, in a very interesting case, looks like, this is something that they were not the only ones to practice, looks like the leaders of Mount Athos, as also of Meteora and of some individual powerful monasteries, recognized the coming powerful Ottomans and established contacts outside the even before the Ottomans were in situ. So this allowed them to keep many of their properties and to be, in a way, protected and even privileged by the Ottoman rulers who came in the Balkans, sometimes a bit later than they were recognized. The Mount Athos is interesting because it provided alternative policies to the Ecumenic Patriarchate. The Ecumenic Patriarchate was powerful voice, but it was next to the Ottoman Sultan. The Ottoman Sultan ultimately appointed, recognized, but without his recognition, the Patriarch couldn't hold his position. So Mount Athos provided alternative, sometimes discordant voice to what the Ecumenic Patriarchate was telling their subjects. Very strongly opposing any innovations, very conservative voice, and one of the centers that inspired a movement, kind of movement for new martyrdom. Have you heard of new martyrdom? You should have. Novi mučenici, mučenici, martyrs for the faith, kind of second wave after the initial spread of Islam. So there is such a wave in the Balkans and in the Ottoman Empire in general. So this is the general picture. By the end of 18th century, the Ecumenic Patriarchate holds all the territories, and the only different voices are coming mainly from monasteries, influential monasteries, regarding politics of the church. Well, the Ottomans were quite aware of their diverse population, Christian population. This is something that I've been working recently on the identity, how much the Christians felt different as Bulgarians, Serbs, Greeks, and so on and so forth, especially in mixed places. The Ottomans also recognized, sometimes they say Albanians, Greeks, Bulgarians, Serbs, whatever. So they knew, or Ivliachi Lebi would say, oh, they speak this language or that language or that language. So they were familiar with the identity, ethnic identity, not yet to talk about national. But in the Ottoman documentation, the usual terms that would be used would be dhimmi for the Orthodox Christians. By the end of the 17th century, however, dhimmis, the Orthodox Christians would increasingly be identified with the term raya. While originally raya was for all taxpayers, Muslims, non-Muslims alike, by the end of 17th century, this change of the name of the term began to occur. We find it more in critical territories, that is border, where there is more confrontation, and where Muslims increasingly became, all of them, military, engaged in military operations. So they would be military, or the Christians would be raya, that is taxpayers. And this would also acquire a bit of offensive, but not as offensive as kefir, infidel, that is, which was also sometimes used, kefir or gebran for the non-Muslims in specific tax records. So these terms were used in different types of Ottoman documentation, but the status of Christians, in particular Orthodox Christians and their institutions, again was the result of very complex mixture of factors. For sure, the basic was the Quranic, because it's Quranic even, dhimmi, although the Quran during the the emergence of the Quran, there was no exactly that concept. It would emerge later, but it was recognition of the people, of the scriptures, rather than dhimmi. But political expediency and the impact of domestic and international politics often brought about significant drifting away from the basis. One of those, well, several of those examples are for the presence of Christian spahis, soldiers, in the first century and a half after the conquest. The existence of Christians among the Akıncı, those who were invading, together with the Ottoman armies. Voinuks, Voinuks originally had quite military functions. Voinuk, for the Serbian audience, it's clear. Vojnik, or soldier, for the Bulgarians as well. Eventually, in the first years even, we find even metropolitans, the high-ranking church prelates, having timars. Timar, that is related to the serving in the army. They didn't serve themselves, but they were sending soldiers. And even some monasteries enjoyed timars, which is quite an absurd policy, but it's absurd from the strict point of view. But it's quite understandable when you know the balances of numbers between Muslims and non-Muslims and the need to provide more people to fight for the Ottomans. So this was in the first centuries. Then by 16th century, that policy would disappear. And Christians would be put more in, even if they serve in the army, they will be in the rear providing services rather than fighting. What were the Christians provided with? Well, subject to the status of dhimmi, they would have some sort of very ambiguous self-rule. And what is the self-rule? The self-rule, I will not talk about the structure of the religious institutions, 3 hierarchical levels. What is interesting for us is that the highest, which included patriarchs, archbishops, metropolitans, bishops, igumens of large monasteries, they were appointed not only by the Christian institution, but also by the Sultan. And I've put here old, well, not that old, berat of the Metropolitan of Nevrokop, today Goce Delchev, from the 1890s, a practice that began in the 15th century. We know about it. Very few berats preserved from that time. Diplomatic structure that evolved in time following the changes of the policies of the Ottoman state and of the church itself and of the Christian communities, which actually lists what the churches and the leaders have to do and have the right to do. What the berat would include would be, well, the name, of course, of the person who is appointed, but also his predecessor, the patriarch who had initiated the appointment, the territory of the diocese that was under his control, the peshkesh, the gift that every person receiving this high appointment had to pay, a gift that was initiated by the Christians and that Ottomans gladly received, a gift that they had to give to their Sultan's treasure, to the treasury, the ecclesiastical functions that he was awarded through officially. The church would claim more the taxes and the fees they had the right to collect. This is very interesting because it's conceding a right to collect taxes, which is an important function, gives power and authority. So sometimes they might pay other taxes, but actually they contributed to the collective tax that the church had to pay to the authorities, sort of a collective jizya. So they wouldn't pay their own jizya, but a collective jizya would be paid. Jizya, do you know? Jizya is the tax that every individual non-Muslim had to pay, male, not females. One of the advantages of being a female. The males had to pay this subject to their legal, financial status, and also physical status. The monasteries enjoyed different status. As I told you, some of them were quite privileged originally, but, and some of them, I mean, as I told you, even received timars, and I want to give some examples with Serbian. I mean, there are others like Prodromus near Ceres, but Ravanica and Resava in Serbia received also timars. But others were included in a timar, or like Gračanica, and or would be eventually included in Valkov's pious foundations, like the Rila monastery. The situation dramatically changed with the famous sale of monasteries, which affected only European monasteries. This was a very interesting finding in several gatherings of scholars who deal with Christianity under the Ottoman Empire, people who work on the Arab lands or Anatolia had never heard of this forced, confiscation of lands, of monasteries, which ultimately crippled the institutions. Professor Fotić has written about this, so I shouldn't be talking in Serbian environment about this. There are several specialists who bring about more and more details about this, but really the result was that together with the Simonian corruption that already existed in the church, this really brought to serious financial challenges. The Christian institutions is both powerful and less powerful. The powerful somehow managed, but just a few examples, like Šishatovac in Srem had to pay 26,000 akces, Dečani in Kosovo 15,000, Rila Monastery 60,000, the Athonite monasteries 970,000 akces. This forced the monasteries to turn increasingly to donations from the north of the Danube principalities, and Russia. Russia would increasingly, from the 17th centuries on, be a powerful factor for the survival of the Orthodox Church because of this financial situation and the increasing pressure on the Christian institutions. Why was this done? Well, the official explanation is because the Ottomans were trying to adjust to the requirements of Islamic law. Less prominent explanation is that the treasury was being, depleted and needed to be repleted. And the fact is interesting that it affected only Christian institutions in the Balkans, but not in the Arab lands. So the church increasingly would depend on external and also material support from craftsmen, merchants, no longer the aristocracy and the state support that it usually enjoyed before. So the functions of the religious authorities were quite prominent even in the barracks. Authority over the religious hierarchy. The most important was that the church was intermediary between, but that's not yet, intermediary between the flock and the authorities. So intermediary in front of the Ottoman authorities, intermediary in front of the flock. So representing both different, and very often we see them being held responsible for what the flock would do, as it would happen even in 1821 with the Greek War of Independence, when the Patriarch was held responsible for the beginning of the Great War of the Greek War of Independence, and was hanged at the entrance of Fener, of the Oecumenic, because he didn't persuade his followers to not rebel against the Ottomans. So authority over the religious hierarchy, dismissing priests, appointing priests, managing the property, collecting ecclesiastical taxes, we see also, and this is probably one of the most important functions with regard to the subjects, to the ordinary flock, was that it had, though not exclusive, only for them, right to deal with the personal status and family law issues related to their flock. Marriage, divorce, estate division, the orphans, guardians, and so on. That is family. The education also was in their hands, although this was not in the barracks. They represented usually the flock with regard to issues related to collective liability, tax allocation, or with inability to pay the taxes. So sometimes even business relations among their folk. And one of the most important was the attempt to keep the network alive. And here we come to the policies of the Ottomans with regard to the Christian prayer places. What happened was that during the conquest, of course, probably all of you have heard, the most important churches would be confiscated even when the settlement had surrendered without fighting. The interesting, however, part is that even those which surrendered kept some places of cult places. Probably the best case is Constantinople, where a few decades after its fall, I think 7, in the 1520s, at the time of Suleiman the Magnificent, arose this issue: why on earth do we have still churches in Constantinople when the city was conquered? What's the problem? Am I not doing something with it?
It's okay. You. 8:35 minutes. That's boy.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Ooh, rushing your time. Do you know maybe where the finishing? Yeah, no. So I was short of it. So what happened was that some places still kept their churches, but others kept losing their churches in the course of time, despite the conquest. What was the reason? Well, excuses like there was war, there was some political issue. I can put here some examples of converted churches. This one is particularly interesting, the Vilincuyo, I say. You can see this is a mosque, but with the cross still integrated in the entrance door. And I think it was an Armenian church, and it happened quite late. Let's not refer to the exact time. The other conversions, sometimes out of the blue, like it happened, for example, in Sofia de Rotonda or Thessaloniki de Rotonda, and so on. But new churches appeared as well, and even new churches in places which emerged as, well, this is an example from a village near Trnovo, new churches from the 17th century, actually 16th, 17th, Albanian church masters and structures. What was interesting is that slowly these new churches would appear, probably first not so solid structures, but gradually becoming stone and even expanding. And this is what I wanted to show, the expansion. This is a drawing of Mahil Keel. From Arbanasi, you can see the church. This is the original. made of bark, and gradually colonnades would be closed and added to the church. All this would be supported with a lot of money. Don't think that Orthodox Christians just cheated. They had to pay for that. But ultimately, it was a very nice negotiation process. The Ottomans were closing their eyes. Of course, they would get some payment, official and unofficial. The Christians expanded their churches. The same would happen also with the new churches. The Ottomans knew that if you want to have Jews, you have to allow them to build a synagogue. If you want to have Orthodox Christians, you have to allow them to build the church. So first wooden, then stone, and Sarajevo has synagogue and Orthodox church, although it appeared as a modern city. I was planning to talk also about conversion, but classes in my university are for 80 minutes, so I'm sorry I'm sitting for 8 minutes.